The Galactic Council had 17 words for impossible, and by my count, they were using all of them at once. I know this because I was sitting in the analyst pit beneath the main chamber floor, which is a fancy way of saying I was in a glorified basement with 6 screens and a chair that hadn't been ergonomically assessed since the last species joined the council. My name is Vel Saron, Junior Intelligence Analyst, 3rd class, which is the kind of title that means you get the night shift and nobody brings you lunch. I'd been on duty for 11 hours when the sensors started screaming. Not metaphorically. The long-range array has an audio alert function that one of my predecessors had set to a sound described in the configuration file as urgent klaxon, medium. It sounded like a Dravathi waterbird being stepped on, repeatedly. I had been meaning to change it for 6 months. I did not change it in time. Analyst Vel Saron. That was Senior Coordinator Pretholan, her voice coming down through the chamber speakers with the particular clipped quality she reserved for catastrophes and my performance reviews. What are you seeing? What I was seeing was 437 unregistered vessels materializing out of transit fold at the edge of the Farpoint sector, in a formation that my tactical overlay was trying very hard to categorize and failing, because the formation wasn't in any of my reference databases. The ships were running no transponder codes. They were responding to none of the 17 standard hailing frequencies. They were, according to every instrument I had, simply not supposed to exist. Unregistered fleet, I said, pulling the data to the main chamber screens. 437 vessels minimum. Transit signatures suggest they folded in from. I ran the calculation twice because the first answer seemed wrong. From inside the quarantine band, the dead zone. The chamber above me erupted. I tuned out most of it, because my job in a crisis is to get information, not to have feelings about information, and right now the information was genuinely extraordinary. The Crethan Armada was 89 minutes from Farpoint Reach Colony. The colony had 40,000 civilians and a planetary defense array that the last inspection report had diplomatically described as aspirational. The council had been debating an intervention resolution for 3 weeks, which meant they'd been doing nothing for 3 weeks with extra steps. And now there were 437 ships between the Armada and the colony, and I had no idea who they belonged to. I ran a species match on the hull configurations. It came back with partial hits, fragmented references, mostly from old survey data, a few field reports from the early expansion era. One result kept surfacing. I pulled the file. Species designation, human. Homeworld, Earth Sol system. First contact date, 83 standard years ago. Status at last survey. Pre-spaceflight primitive, quarantine recommended pending development assessment. I read that last part twice. Then the unregistered fleet opened a single comm channel, broadcasting simultaneously on all 47 standard frequencies. The voice that came through was calm, slightly bored, and speaking what my translation matrix identified as 47 different languages at the same time, which shouldn't have been possible from a single transmission source. This is the UES Perseverance to all vessels in the Farpoint sector. We've got it from here. Farpoint Reach Colony, please shelter in place. Crethan Armada, you're going to want to stop moving. Everyone else, Council, we're assuming you can hear this, maybe take a breath. We'll explain later. The chamber above me had gone absolutely silent. I looked at my threat assessment file on the human species. The last line, added by some analyst 80 years ago who'd clearly been trying to cover themselves, read, recommend non-engagement. Species demonstrates unpredictable behavior under pressure. I was beginning to understand what they meant. The human fleet didn't wait for a response. On my screens, it was already moving. What the Crethan called a war formation, the humans apparently called a Tuesday. I want to be clear about what I witnessed over the next 40 minutes, because I was the one watching the tactical screens while the council chamber above me devolved into something that could only be described as organized screaming. I had the sensors. I had the data. I had a cup of cold, stimulant beverage that I forgot to drink because I was too busy watching what was, objectively, the most tactically improbable engagement in recorded council history. The Crethan Armada was not a force to be taken lightly. 300 vessels, heavy class, with coordinated shielding arrays that could interlock into a defensive lattice so effective that the Council's own military advisors had, in their formal assessment 3 weeks ago, recommended against direct engagement. Their formation was textbook, a compressed assault wedge designed to punch through planetary defense lines like a blade through membrane. They had never lost a major engagement in 40 years of expansion. They had also, apparently, never fought humans. The human fleet split into 7 groups without any visible command signal. I checked for tight beam communications, quantum link bursts, anything that would explain how 400 ships coordinated a simultaneous maneuver without broadcasting a single byte of tactical data. There was nothing. Later, much later, I would learn that human ship commanders use something called doctrine, which is essentially a shared understanding of how everyone will behave so thorough that they don't need to talk during the fight. At the time, watching it happen, it looked like 400 ships had simply decided to do the same thing at the same moment because they'd all had the same thought. 3 of the groups pushed forward, drawing the Crethan attention toward the colony approach vector. The Armada responded, rotating its formation to face the threat, which is exactly what the formation was designed to do, present maximum firepower to a frontal assault. The other 4 groups came out of the debris field on the Armada's flank. There is a region of space near Farpoint Reach called the Doreth Scatter, the remains of a moon that lost an argument with a comet about 2,000 years ago. The Council's tactical advisors had classified it as impassable for fleet movement. The debris density was too high, the navigation too complex, the risk of collision too significant for any military commander to run ships through it at combat speed. The humans ran all 4 groups through it at combat speed. I watched ships threading through debris fields that my own instruments were flagging as collision hazards. Watched them emerge on the other side still in formation, looser than before, with a few fresh hull scores visible on the sensor returns, but intact and moving. The Crethan didn't have time to rotate their formation before the flanking groups were already inside their optimal engagement range. How are they doing that? Coordinator Pretholin had come down to the pit. She was standing behind me, staring at my screens. I hadn't heard her come in. I don't know, I said, which was honest. I don't know how they're coordinating. I don't know why they went through the debris field. I don't know, I stopped, because something else was happening on screen. One of the human vessels, a mid-sized ship near the center of the forward push, had taken significant fire and was broadcasting a distress signal. I watched 2 other human ships immediately break formation and move to shield it, absorbing fire that should have been going into an already damaged hull. I don't know why they're doing that either. They're protecting a damaged ship, Pretholin said, at cost to themselves. Yes. In the middle of a battle. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. That's not optimal. No, I agreed. It's really not. The Crethan Armada had never lost a major engagement. That record ended at the 41-minute mark, when their flagship broadcast a surrender hail on the standard frequency. The human fleet's response was immediate, and it came from a ship I hadn't been tracking, a mid-sized vessel that had been running without any special designation, somewhere in the middle of the formation. Surrender accepted. All Crethan vessels stand down and you won't be boarded. Move your fleet to the designated holding coordinates and we'll sort out the rest later. Don't make this weird. The council chamber above me had gone from organized screaming to complete silence. I tried to raise the human fleet commander. The channel connected immediately, which surprised me, and the voice that answered surprised me more, young, relaxed, with background noise that my translation matrix identified as chewing. Perseverance forward comms, this is Specialist ArmadaHFY. Who's calling? This is Vel Saron, Galactic Council Intelligence. I'm trying to reach your commander. She's a little busy right now. Can I take a message? I looked at my screen, where the Crethan Armada was moving in neat order toward the holding coordinates. Yes. Please tell her the Council requests a formal communication at her earliest convenience. Sure thing. There was a pause and the distinct sound of someone eating something crunchy. Hey, is this the Alien Council, like the big one? Yes. Oh, cool. Yeah, she'll want to talk to you. Give her like 10 minutes. The channel clicked off. Pretholin looked at me. I looked at Pretholin. Unpredictable behavior under pressure, I said. She didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Commander Yoon looked like someone had interrupted her lunch, which it turned out they had. The face on my screen was human. I'd pulled enough visual records from the old survey files to recognize the basic configuration, but the survey files hadn't quite prepared me for the specificity of the expression. She had the look of a person who was doing the thing that needed doing and was prepared to be polite about it, but was keeping track of exactly how much politeness was being required of her. Behind her, the mess hall of the UES Perseverance was visible and audible, crew members eating, talking, someone laughing at something off-screen. The battle that had just ended appeared to have had essentially no effect on their appetite. The full council had assembled for this. All 42 member species, their representatives crowded into the main chamber, watching my screen. I was still in the pit because nobody had told me to leave, and I had the distinct impression that everyone had forgotten I was there. Commander Yoon, said first speaker Orethvel, with the ceremonial gravity that had been polished over 2 centuries of formal diplomacy. On behalf of the Galactic Council, we acknowledge your intervention in the Farpoint Reach engagement and request a formal accounting of your species' presence, intentions, and... We heard you were in trouble, Yoon said, so we came. A pause. I beg your pardon. The Crethan were going to hit Farpoint Reach, 40,000 people. We picked up your council debates about 3 weeks ago. You were going in circles. We'd been watching the Crethan expansion for a while. She picked up something from off-screen and took a bite of it. We've been monitoring council communications for about 30 years, actually. Your encryption is pretty good for the record. It took us a while. The first speaker's secondary arms, a stress indicator, I'd learned, for his species, were moving in small, agitated circles. You have been monitoring closed council communications for 30 years. We wanted to know what was happening out here. We're new. It seemed smart. She shrugged, which is a human gesture I had read about but hadn't quite understood until I saw it, a kind of physical punctuation meaning roughly, this is simply the situation. What else is there to say? We filed about 1,000 formal contact requests over the years, never heard back. There was a silence in the chamber. I checked the records quietly. I found the contact requests, 1,047 of them, the first dating back 28 years. They had been filed, routed to the new species intake office, and were sitting in a queue that had not been reviewed since the intake office's budget had been cut 11 years ago. Your intentions going forward, the first speaker said. The council needs to understand what humanity wants from this engagement. Territorial consideration, resource rights, a formal treaty of. We just didn't want anyone to get hurt, Yoon said. The first speaker stopped. Around the chamber, 42 species representatives went very still in 42 different ways. Could you elaborate? On which part? The part where that's your complete answer. Yoon looked slightly puzzled, the way someone looks when they're asked to explain something they find self-evident. There were 40,000 people about to get hit by an armada. We had the ships. We were close enough. It seemed like the obvious thing to do. A crew member leaned into frame, said something quietly, and Yoon nodded. We'd also like to formally request council membership for what it's worth. We've been waiting on that for a while too." The chamber erupted again. I sat in my chair, in my pit, watching 42 species argue about what to do with a civilization that had just saved 40,000 lives and described it as the obvious thing to do. And I thought about the threat assessment file on my screen and the old analyst's note. And I thought about what I actually wanted to say. And then, before I knew I was going to do it, I spoke. "Commander Yoon." She looked toward my corner of the screen. "Yeah." The chamber went quiet. I was aware, suddenly, that I had interrupted the first speaker, which was not something junior analysts, third class, were supposed to do. I was also aware that I had a question that I needed to ask more than I needed to keep my job. "Why did you come?" The real reason, not the political answer. Yoon was quiet for a moment. Behind her, the mess hall noise continued. Someone's fork on a plate, 2 crew members laughing, the ordinary sounds of people who had just fought a battle and were now eating dinner and apparently fine with both of those things being true simultaneously. "Because nobody else did," she said. I don't know what the rest of the chamber heard in that. I know what I heard. I had spent 11 hours on shift that night watching the council debate, watching 42 civilizations calculate the costs and benefits and political implications of helping 40,000 people who needed help. I had watched the Crethan Armada move and the clock tick and the debate continue. And I had thought, not for the first time, not even for the 10th time, that there was something broken in a galaxy where the math on saving people was this complicated. She said it like it was simple, like it was the only possible answer to the only possible question. The council took 6 more weeks to formally classify humanity as a Tier 1 unregistered power, to argue about their membership application, to debate the implications of a species that had been listening to everyone's communications for 30 years and had used the information to show up when someone needed help. There were motions and counter-motions, and 3 separate committees formed to assess the human threat profile. I wasn't involved in any of it. I filed my final shift report that morning, went home, slept for 10 hours, and then opened my intelligence assessment for the human species. I deleted the last line, the one about unpredictable behavior under pressure. I stared at the blank space for a while. Then I typed, "Reclassify, not unpredictable, just paying attention." I submitted it, closed my terminal, and went to make breakfast. Somewhere out there, in a mess hall on a ship called the Perseverance, I suspected someone was doing exactly the same thing.